And good morning, everybody. We're live. Rise and shine. Welcome. You made it through the week. You made another week of amazing food quality, food safety, all the amazing products like Dustin has on the wall behind him, all those things out there that we all enjoy and love. And guess what? People don't even notice most of the time, but we do. And we wanted to say thank you. We appreciate all that you do. If you're new, this is the Food Safety Chat Live. My name is Brian Armentrout with the Food Leadership Group. And every Friday at this time, 8 a.m., Mountain Time, 10 a.m. Eastern Time, we go live and we have a conversation with you on LinkedIn and YouTube, and we bring to you all things food safety related. So if you are new, part of what you're going to notice with the chat here is this is not a presentation. We aren't lecturing to you. We're not telling you what you have to do. This is meant to be collaborative because, as we all know, food safety, not a point of competition. The consumer doesn't care. We're all in the same business as far as they're concerned, and they judge us accordingly. So we're all learning from each other and upping our game. So with this, I always love it when I have two guests on the show. It always makes for a fantastic conversation. So today I have Dustin Finkel and a new guest, John McHugh. And welcome, guys. How are you doing? They are with MacGray Consulting. How's your day going so far?
Great. It's only about 3 hours old at this point. Not on standard time. How are you?
Doing well, doing well. And so, yeah, you guys are in Colorado as well. So you're in the Boulder area, right?
Yep. John's deep in the woods of Boulder. I pretend to be in Boulder. I'm really in the suburb.
And John, where?
I'm in the mountains. I'm in the mountains up above Boulder, up Boulder Canyon a little bit.
Nice, very nice. And I am in, of course, good old Loveland, Colorado, which we know here people confuse with the ski resort. So it's not the ski resort; it's the city of Loveland, which is kind of by Fort Collins. And so everybody's shuffling in here. So we got Michelle, Brett, and Paul with Culture Advisory Group. Thank you for joining us, guys. Cheryl. Hey, Joe's here. Awesome. I love it when Joe's on the show as well. So with Paul and Brett, I did want to give them a shout out as well. So Culture Advisory Group, as you can kind of see here, zoop up on the banner, is our sponsor. And so super excited to have Culture Advisory Group sponsoring the chat. I'll put their website at the end of the conversation here. You can go check out their different services. They do amazing work based out of Toronto, and they also work here in the U.S. as well. So thank you, gentlemen. Greatly appreciate it. So gosh, fall is here, which is super cool. We're going to get into all that type of stuff, but ton to cover here. And when Dustin is here, like I said in the promos as we were getting ready for this, you bring the goods. I learn a ton when you're on. And John, not to put you on the spot, but I know you're going to do it too. But before we get going here, guys, let's have a drink of your favorite beverage to get us going. Everybody join us. Nice. Ooh, look at that. Cheers. Moran, good to see you. Janie. Awesome.
I'm going to green tea these days. That's a new thing.
Nice. Eat healthy. I need to do that too. Too much coffee. So, John, one of the things that I do with my guests to torture my guests is we do a dad joke before we get going here. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
The dad joke. And this month we're doing Halloween themed dad jokes. So, what is a mummy's favorite type of music?
I know the answer, but I'll let you deliver the punchline.
Rap music.
How do I get sound effects? Who did the ghost take to the prom?
I don't know. Who did the ghost take to the prom?
His ghoul friend.
Ah.
How did the gourd get stronger?
How did the what get stronger?
The gourd. How did the gourd get stronger?
How did you get stronger?
Pumpkin iron.
I need a new sound effect for you here. Let's do.
That's the sound effect that John gives me 90% of the time when I tell him a joke. Actually, John, what do you got? What do you got, John?
I got nothing, especially not on the spot. I'm not as you know, not a comedian myself.
Nice.
So let's dive in here. And so one of the things, so you guys have been super busy, and so your business is really, really cool in what you guys do. So Dustin, he's teaching at CU, adjunct professor. John, your engineering work. You guys are working together. So what type of space do you guys work in? What type of clients do you normally have?
It's really awesome to have John working with me, because I think one thing that we do, and I'll come back to answering your actual question, but one thing that you'll see in this conversation even probably is John and I don't always agree on how we perceive the world. We come at it from very different perspectives. So it's a really nice complementary, but we do it in a way that I think is additive, not detractive. And so, John has a very strong, and I'm sure he'll share it, but a very strong operational entrepreneurial background. He started his own food company at a very young age, built that up, has very strong analytics, operations, etc. I come from a similar background, but more financially based, big CPG, going to starting my own company, private equity, all that good stuff, and also financially based. But I'm much more commercially minded, and John's more operationally minded. And so what we do, and we kind of stumbled into this great opportunity where we help companies theoretically of all sizes, but I would say typically our businesses are pre-revenue to kind of $10 to $20 million in revenue. And it's soup to nuts. My joke is always we do everything from CEO whispering and strategy to janitorial and literally everything in between. And so the things that we don't do, we have great resources that we go out to. So if I have a really strong QA kind of issue, I might come to you, Brian, right? Or the risk assessment. But we tend to really help not only strategize but execute. And if any of you have seen my email signature, which I strongly believe in, it says strategy without execution is hallucination. And I'm a very, very firm believer in that. But that's a Thomas Edison. He deserves the credit for that quote. So that's what we do. I don't know, John, what you want to add to that, but it's been great having John as a partner on my team.
Yeah, I just add to that. I mean, like, first and foremost, our job is to help CEOs and founders of small brands avoid some of the landmines that we've stepped on through our career, and essentially execute around those. And so it's really fun to get to work with, a good handful of brands at a time and really see their progress.
Yeah, I think we take, or I know we take a lot of pride in, and honestly, frustration in helping companies avoid, I'll just say, the snake oil salesman of the world, right? There's so many ways to spend money inefficiently, inaccurately, poorly in this industry and make decisions because either you're being guided incorrectly or incentives are misaligned. And so, I'm a lot more emotionally biased than John is, but, I get pretty fired up when I see brands getting screwed over. And so it's something we really pride ourselves in trying to help them avoid.
Yeah, that when that business is in that infancy, extremely vulnerable. So you've got this really cool idea. You go out and you take all this risk. You start developing it, and you're just hoping to survive. You think, oh my God, cash flow. I just need to keep this thing going. And then you start growing, and it starts reaching that point. That's a good way to think of it, Dustin. You're really vulnerable at that point because now you realize you don't know what you don't know, and now you know, and you're like, oh crap. Right. And then somebody's coming and saying, I can help you with that. Yeah. Right. And then
it's hard. I mean, it's really interesting to see the evolution of this little advisory consultancy, whatever we are, over time. When I first started doing this, I got a lot of clients that were, the best way to put it is, the house was a bit on fire. Right. And so I used to use house analogies a lot. Like they had this nice house, but the piping was all rusted out and full of, the walls were full of asbestos and the wiring is sparking, and we had to go in and try and clean that up. And the reason 90% of the time that happened was because someone gave them advice that they didn't know was not the right way to go based on poor incentives. And in a lot of cases in sales, typically where they have leaned into potential distribution they shouldn't be in, they've leaned into risks that they didn't think through properly, and which I know we'll get into. So it's really hard when we get those type of brands because oftentimes we're trying to re-insulate, re-put the wiring in while they're also trying to add another story to the house, right? Because you have to kind of stay alive. And so that's one area that is very heart-wrenching. It's nice when we kind of are able to work with companies that are pre some of those decisions, so we can at least help steer them. But we're very, as entrepreneurs ourselves, John and I will tell you that we always know that it's their decision, it's their company, it's their responsibility. We're just here to provide kind of a roadmap and help them understand left versus right. What are the options? What are the potential pitfalls, what are the benefits, and ultimately help them make better decisions.
Right. And yeah, that kind of gets back to our theme for today, which we've been talking a lot about here on the chat, is risk. And every business has risk. And that risk changes over time. The risk in a small, a medium, and a large business are completely different. And in that small business, to your point, what I do a lot in my business too, and I talk about it in my book, is the knowledge and the expertise we have is through the bad decisions we made in the past. It's like, oh crap, why did I do that? And by kind of paying it forward, you want to help other people not make the same mistakes you made. And again, to your point, Dustin, you can point them in the right direction, but they've still got to walk. It's still their path. And if they don't listen to you,
it's one thing I tell people is I started my food company with, at the time, about 14, 15 years of CPG experience, and I still screwed up left and right. Yeah. So God bless these people who come in without any experience, and it's so hard. And so that's where we're really trying to come in. But again, even with all that experience, I made so many mistakes. And again, we're not smarter than anyone else. We've just walked that path 1,000 times.
Exactly. Well, and the skill set, and we saw this at White Wave, the skill set of being an entrepreneur and creating silk is very different than the skill set of being a CEO and running a CPG. They're completely different.
For sure.
So with that, yeah, let's dive into your experience and expertise, because it's amazing. And so with those startup companies, so John's background, as we were getting to know each other, is really cool. I know he's got a lot of very interesting aspects to chime in here with as well. So if you're working with a small company, a startup, and you're kind of getting in there in that early process, what are some of the things that you're looking at with these guys relative to risk?
I mean, one of the biggest ones always is, it always comes back to finances and cash flow. And so do they, the first risk is, do they have any understanding whatsoever of what kind of cash they need on hand, and sort of the difference between being profitable and being cash flow positive, and having the resources to make the executions that they need to make to mitigate some of those other risks. And so, we find that that's always one of the first places we start. And it's like, if you don't get that right, every other decision you make, you're like making while you're in a chokehold. And so it makes it really hard to make good decisions in any other aspect of the business.
All right. So from a financial standpoint, what's kind of do they have, from your experience then, John, a general, do they understand top line, bottom line, EBITDA, all these things that we get, we throw around in the CPG
completely world? Depends. I mean, we get some that are pretty buttoned up with that, or come from a career maybe that had them diving into P&Ls and stuff. And then others, like when I started my company, I was 25 and I'd never heard the word P&L before, and we get a lot of people like that also that just have no clue. And some have a great aptitude for it and like to dive in and learn it. And some are just kind of like, here, you guys handle this. Tell me what I need to do.
Yeah, it's tough when we first get a client, because oftentimes they're asking questions and I'm like, well, as soon as we have the financial model built, we can answer those questions, right? How do you properly evaluate any decision when you don't understand the impact to your P&L, to cash flow, to working capital, to all of those areas? And so I think it's absolutely critical to have that. And so John and I are always pushing really hard initially to make sure we have a really buttoned up financial model, whether it's something they bring or something we build for them, because 80% of decisions, in my opinion, are financial, 20% are qualitative. And so understanding the impact financially first, and then layering on any qualitative aspects. I can't think of a decision that's made. I also preach really heavily. This is like my one academic thing that I preach constantly to brands in the real life. And when I teach at CU, I'm not teaching the academic books. I don't even use a textbook because I think it's not realistic. So I'm focused on what I'd identify as the 4 Ps. I'm always talking about this: product, place, pricing, promotion. And each one of those have a high analytical aspect to them, right? How can you understand your product without the price? How can you understand the price without the placement? How can you understand the price without the promotion? And so on and so forth. And so all those aspects come down to financial risk. And John said something really, really important that I want to underline, which is there's a difference between profitability, or P&L profit, and cash flow. And that's an area where we have seen multiple times brands ask us, how are we showing profitability on the P&L and I am out of cash?
Mm-hmm.
And the inability to understand that can get you into a lot of trouble quickly.
Right. You miss payroll once. That's, that's really, really bad. And I want to reemphasize with everybody else on this call as well, too, because some people may be thinking, well, what's this got to do with food safety? This has everything to do with food safety because decisions are being made at the executive level that are going to impact, to your point, that P&L. How do you institute these type of programs? How fast are you growing? All of these things. And so the quality people, the food safety people, the technical people in the company need to understand this language because as the head of a company, Dustin, that's the language you speak. So if I come to you and say, hey, I need some money, I'm a brand new quality guy in this startup, and I'm like, okay, I need to have money for certification. And in your mind, you're doing top lunch, we're just fitting the budget. No, we can't do that right now, right?
Yeah, anyone who's heard me on the podcast before, or really anytime, I'm always saying for quality, but anything, quantify it.
Yeah.
A good way to propose something to somebody is to give them a quantitative perspective, right? And so it makes decisions actually really easy when you put it into numbers, even if you're not numerically focused, right?
Mm-hmm.
Plus is greater than minus. Bigger numbers are better than smaller numbers in most cases. And so, if you have a quality opportunity, a risk issue, positive or negative, and being able to work with, if you're not capable of doing this yourself and working with the CFO or working with the controller or working with the finance team to quantify the impact to the company, it's going to go over a lot better than, and I'm going to oversimplify, but hey, this is a risk. If we don't do this, there's a real risk to the company. What does that mean? That doesn't mean anything to me. Versus let me walk you through the math, help you understand the impact to the organization. Let me help you understand the impact to sales, to investors, to the company, and then we can talk the qualitative stuff, right? So I do think that's a huge thing. And John, handles a lot more of the quality ops stuff for our clients in a lot of cases. And I think it's the same thing there where we're constantly always putting it through a financial lens. I don't know, John, if you want to kind of think of an example or kind of follow up on this, but it's a huge issue is making sure that you quantitatively think through it, not just, this is a problem, we should deal with it.
Right.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I mean, you brought up the example of a certification. That's one area we talk with our clients a lot about is claims versus certifications and, running the numbers to see if investing in a certification makes sense at their level. And oftentimes, what we get to is we show like, hey, you can make this claim if you do these 3 things without having to invest in that certification, and we can invest in the certification later. But I think at a high level, the advice that we give our clients is, we look through everything through that financial lens, but there's 2 things that are non-negotiable. And the first is food safety, right? If you're not putting out a safe product from day one, you're a house of cards instantly. Yeah. And then 2, as you mentioned, missing payroll, like financially, everything's negotiable except payroll. Like you have to, you hit payroll every week, no matter what else happens.
Yeah. Or you're going to be by yourself very quickly.
Yeah.
It's illegal. Yes. I mean, it's literally legal. If you think about, push comes to shove, even from a liquidation, the number one creditor of your company is always going to be your payroll. So,
yeah, good point. I mean, so part of this too is when you're in that small company stage, you have this this unicorn that's sitting out there, and you're like, oh, geez, if I just get Costco, if I can just get into Costco, then man, I'm set. And be careful what you wish for, because okay, fine. Hey, we got a Costco order. They want 5 truckloads in 2 weeks, and you can't do it. And plus they want to your point, John, you need certification and all these types. You have to walk before you can run. You have to build all of these things, and you have to be patient in those regards. And that getting a big client like that is a very quick way to burn your company out.
One thing I would even back up, going back to your original question, is these risks of small companies, Brian, but I actually have seen this in the biggest of companies, is the risk of translation from benchtop to commercialization.
Yes.
And this goes across all areas of the business, but we can focus on quality. If you think about layering up from a pound of ingredients to a tanker or a tote or thousands of pounds, if you think about making sure that things are arriving, that they're QA, that you have all the documents that you're going through and what the implications to the food safety is. I think that's a huge one that is often overlooked. But the biggest risk to a company, and again, this is regardless of size, because I've seen this at all size. I'm just laughing because Cortland's chat about the IRS is always first. The biggest risk is what you don't know,
Right.
And again, that's what I got into trouble with, as an entrepreneur. I think that's what we really try and help companies evaluate. But in the end, and I'm going to come back to this over and over again, the best ways we can convince somebody to make a decision is by giving them the quantitative analysis to help them make that decision, right? Risk versus reward, and really thinking through that translation from creation to execution and marrying that map appropriately.
Right. A lot of times you'll hear from small startups, they'll just say, oh, Dustin, there's nothing to worry about. I'm just going to go to a co-man. They'll take care of everything for me. And they'll.
You see both John and I laughing on that one. John, you can.
Yeah, that's a very common one, and one that I found myself in too when I was, 26 and a year into my business and trying to keep up on our own little manufacturing line. Like, we thought, there was a yellow brick road to the co-man, and then we were going to sit back and watch the sales go in. And fast forward to 9 months later, showing up at the co-packer with trucks and loading our stuff back on because they just couldn't do it, and building out our own plants in like 3 or 4 weeks to keep product rolling. So it's, if you don't, and that was, as much our fault as the co-packer's fault of not understanding what that relationship actually meant and how to manage it properly. And to your point, thinking that you can just pass it off and watch the sales roll in.
I mean, a huge issue we deal with, and again, I can personally articulate this happens at all sizes of organizations, is working with co-mans.
Yes.
This is not a knock on co-mans, because John and I have both, I started one and ran one, and I've run multiple. John has run co-mans. We both understand it from both sides. So it's not a knock, but the reality is, a lot of cases, the co-mans have their priorities, their opportunities, what they're trying to get done. And I don't think they take the time, and again, this isn't a knock, but they don't take the time to help the brands coming into them understand what needs to happen and what the risks are, right? Because again, these companies come in a bit blind and just expect everything to work, and they don't understand. I think if a co-man took more time to help them understand the QA process, to help them understand the business model, to help them understand how a co-man becomes profitable, the incentives for them, it can help a smaller company be much more aligned with trying to work with them. And so that becomes a big time utilization of John and my work, is working and translating those things from brand speak to co-man speak.
Yeah.
Well, I think co-mans is often a risk area that people don't look at, even aside from that, because a co-packer's risk is also your risk. So that's everything from, their FSQA programs, right? If they're not buttoned up, that's, at the end of the day, it's your product on the shelf, not their product on the shelf. But also their financial risks. I was working with a brand at a point where everything was great until the co-packer started running out of money. And then they were cutting shifts. And again, that very quickly became our problem. So one of the things we coach brands on is, like, as soon as you get up and running in your first co-packer, we're looking for your second co-packer. To mitigate that risk and spread it out, even if the goal is to only run one shift a month at the second one, just to have somebody on deck that knows the product and can ramp quickly is important.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, co-manufacturing locations, they're a business. They are in this business to make money as well, and they're thinking of it primarily from their viewpoint. And if I'm running a co-man, my job is to fill the lines, right? And I want big customers and smaller customers. I can fill up my schedule, and that's my concern. And they may not be thinking about you. And to John's point as well, if something goes wrong and you have a recall, it's your name, it's your brand on the recall in almost all the cases. Sometimes you see the co-man, but not very often. You're the one taking the heat for that, and you're the one who's going to have the damage to your name and reputation.
Yeah, and that's where helping. Jumping to something that I think we were maybe going to talk about at the end of the talk, but I'm just going to jump ahead a bit, because I do think this is something I wish I had done when I was at big CPGs and even at medium size, whatever, is spending time with different resources and cross-functionals around the organization, not just for networking purposes, which is important, not just for relationship building, which is important, but ask them what they actually do for their job and how they do it. You know, as an example, does the QA person understand how the logistics person is organizing freight? Does the salesperson understand how the QA person gets through an SQF audit? Does I can keep going on this forever. The point being is, I think when there's two reasons for that I highly encourage it. One is it gives you a much clearer transparency on what they're dealing with day to day and how to talk their language and how to make assumptions and empathize with the challenges that they're dealing with. The second is selfish, which is it gives you the opportunity to leverage that knowledge to be better at your job and be much more successful. So, you know, I wish I had done that because I had to learn the hard way when I started my own company and just doing it and screwing up and failing. But God, I wish I had the opportunity when I was in a bigger company, spend more time with QA folks, spend more time with logistics folks, spend more time with supply chain folks, and et cetera, and really understand the gaps, the challenges, the incentives, et cetera, because that helps alleviate risk. Because all of this comes back down to risk of operating. And if the operations person doesn't understand the sales challenges and the salesperson doesn't understand the finance challenges and so on and so forth, this is where risk inherently becomes in. Because what's the number one risk, in my opinion? It's human risk, which is emotions and incentives. And if those two things aren't properly aligned, that's where things get way out of whack.
Yeah, and as the leader of the organization, so you're starting out this food company and you're growing, and it could be a simple example like this, guys, is I found the perfect co-man in Kent, Washington. They can make my product wonderfully, but my customer is in Florida. You need to understand the logistics for that. These are going to be LTL loads. How's it going to get there? How much do I need to add for my pricing on this to make sure? Now, then you start thinking about, to your point, Dustin, these things start spiraling around. And now you start thinking about from the terms of like, what type of shelf life guarantee is my sales guy promising to Publix for this product? Am I going to be able to meet that, or is it going to expire by the time it takes 2 weeks to get across the country? Is that the right thing to do? Right? You need that information to make a decision as an executive.
And by the way, the more you know, I feel like this is an NBC thing. The more you know, like back in the day. But the reality is, you know, John and I mean, we even had an issue yesterday with a co-man pushing a particular challenge onto a brand of ours. And the client is like, I don't understand. That doesn't make any sense. But because we've walked that path, had those conversations, we're able to say, hey, we went back to the co-man and said, look, if we give you a letter that offsets the risk, blah, 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 will that solve the problem? It is a small issue, but the point is being able to understand that challenge allows you to go to if you're going to do your Kent, Washington to Florida example, and go to the logistics person and be like, hey, I understand this challenge. This is economic savings of being in Washington versus being somewhere else. Let's talk through the challenges of logistics. Does this still make sense? It allows you to kind of navigate those things. If you understand financials, this is an accounting thing. Accounting is not black and white. Accounting is heavily gray. And so, you know, where things sit on a P&L, whether it's above gross margin or below gross margin, has a big impact on how the CFO or the CEO is going to take that decision. If you're able to manipulate it, again, not illegally, within all the constraints of GAAP, that might change how you are able to get your program across. This is why understanding those things impact QA, food safety, et cetera, translating it into business speak, you know, and financial speak.
Right. I want to emphasize that and underline that. In food safety and quality, if you understand this language, you can have these conversations. And your value in the company goes up immeasurably. If I can come to your office, Dustin, as the CEO, and I can have this conversation with you from a quality standpoint and say, hey, listen, as Sean's pointing out here, yeah, I totally get that this co-packer looks like it's the right call for us from a business standpoint based upon profit margin and these activities. We also need to go in and approve them because we run a risk of allergen cross-contamination, which will cost the company X. You know, and now your wheels. Okay, yeah, tell me more about that, Brian. Versus, as we talked about on one of our past chats, Justin, you know, you don't want to be the quality guy who's just, no, you have to do this. if you see me walking down the hall and I have that attitude, you're going to turn around and walk a different way because it's not a productive conversation.
100%. I mean, we talk about this a lot with consumer complaints.
Mm-hmm.
How to properly evaluate consumer complaints. What does it mean? How do we evaluate that? And size of company does matter. I mean, money, cash flow, size of company matters. The example I use often is if someone eats a bad Oreo, they're probably going to come back and eat Oreos again.
Yeah. They're
going to give them the benefit of the doubt. Someone eats a bad product from a brand new company, probably never coming back, and you've lost that customer for life. So or it takes a lot to overcome that. So I do think there's a lot in there. I know John deals with a lot of like helping evaluate the challenges of cash. I'm going to turn this back to cash flow because I think one of the things that John does really well is the risk of savings versus cash flow. So John, where I'm steering you towards is the conversation around like sometimes we're like, hey, we can save 10% on margin, but then you have to spend $3 million in cash flow, right? And the pros and cons of that risk. So I don't know if you want to chat through that.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely something we see a lot, especially when we're helping small brands really understand their gross margin and understand like the targets that they're trying to get to have a sustainable business. And they'll come back and say, hey, great news. I can save 12 cents on our packaging. I just have to buy 1 million units of packaging. And it's like, great. But, we're not going to invest, you don't have $120,000 of free cash right now to invest into that packaging. And the other big risk on it, and this is actually probably the bigger risk, is if there's one constant in these small businesses, it's change. There's no possible way that you're going to be using the exact same packaging by the time you get through that year of packaging that you want to go buy. And so understanding that, you're actually, even though you're saving some money on the P&L from a cash flow standpoint, you're tying up a bunch of cash. And by the time push comes to shove, you're probably going to end up writing off half of that packaging and be worse off for it.
Yeah. And this goes back to that understanding of accounting, finance, and cash flow as a QA person.
Yes.
Because I do think those things matter. And it's funny because John, and this is a great example of something John's really helped me with, because I kind of go in that commercial mindset and also CFO mindset of margin, percentage, gross margin. And I'll often come and be like, I mean, John's maybe protecting me from myself, but I'll be often that person who brings, it's like, hey, I think I found a way to save us 12% or 12 cents or whatever it is. He's like, well, do you really want to spend $1 million and have 5 years worth of packaging sitting there? Yeah. Right. So there are trade-offs in how to think about that.
Or that, I mean, if you have a small company, you're trying to differentiate yourself in a sea of products. And so if you're in the beverage space, yeah, good luck. So you're trying to come up with a new, unique ingredient or something that's going to make you stand out. And to John's point, it's like, oh, okay, yeah, we can order that ingredient. The minimum order quantity, and this comes from Indonesia, is going to be a container full, and it's going to probably expire before we use it.
And by the way, this is not a small company issue. I have been at many. Well, let me actually say, every big CPG I've worked with, every big brand I've ever worked with, every change that's ever happened has had the same issue. It's just on a much bigger scale. And yes, the company has the cash and the resources to, like, whatever, write off $200,000 of packaging, and who cares? That stuff, it does add up. And even though you have that, doesn't mean that that's the right way to play the game. And so these issues that we're talking about in a small company are the same at a big company. I've never seen a big company properly execute a change without having hundreds of thousands of dollars of risk associated financially. And again, if you as a ops, QA, whatever your role is, are able to go to your team and say, hey, I have an opportunity to save the company hundreds of thousands of dollars, you're going to be a hero regardless of the size of the company.
Yes, absolutely. Early in my career, when I worked in the lab, we were doing testing methodologies manually, and it took like 3 to 5 days to run these tests. And new rapid methods were coming out, and they cut, in half the time that it took. But I went to my boss. I'm like, hey, there's this really cool new method that's going to save time. Can I buy it? She's like, how much is it? That's $30,000. No, right? So I was like, damn. So then I thought about it, and I'm like, we have to store a whole lot of product on hold while we're waiting for these test results. How much does it save the company if we can release that product in 3 days instead of 5 days? So I went to the logistics guy and we figured out the number. It was huge, huge number. Went back to my boss and said, can I buy this? This has an ROI of 2 weeks. And she's like, yeah, why is it not in the lab now? Right, was her response. So you have to learn that language.
Well, and I think I was just looking at Alexis's comment about ingredients, not packaging. The other factor is not just expiration, it's performance. So one thing like spices, where we deal with a lot, spice may have a year-long expiration, but the reality is the potency of that spice or flavor diminishes over time, right? In most cases. And so, yes, in theory, in 6 months, you can still use it, but are you going to give the consumer the same experience? And consumer risk is, to me, the biggest risk of them all in terms of the impact to your company. You know, I've said this on the podcast before, which is we are, even nonprofits to a certain degree, every company is out there to sell more stuff, whether it's their service, whether it's their ideas, whether it's their products. If the consumer isn't buying it, there's a problem. Now, where this leads into is that tension point between sales and ops in a lot of cases, right? Sales marketing is one and ops again the other. There's sometimes that tension. And so, you know, I used to preach as the CEO, and again, I was more commercially minded, but I would say, look, our job is to sell product. So help me understand how this benefits selling product or reduces the risk of selling less product. But keep that in mind. Every company you guys work for is there to sell. You're a for-profit company, and even nonprofits, there's a misnomer, right? Nonprofits still have to sell their good service idea. So what is it that you're doing to support that goal?
Nice. And circling back to the point you made earlier, Dustin, is a lot of times we get, especially as the company grows. So you have a founder and you create a product and, ooh, this is my product. And you're in love with that product. Great. And as you grow, that becomes the benchmark. Is that the right benchmark? Why are the consumers buying this product? Why do they like it? And you need to transition to that point. And that's part of the job then in quality, is to understand, back to your point around complaints, what don't the consumers like about this? Because they have an expectation. That's what matters, their expectation. And if you have a head of the company who just, they can't let go of that and they want to make every decision, you're gonna have some big time risk down the road with that. And also, there's a lot of times too and I have to talk with people who are sent to me, and they'll say, I've got this really cool salsa recipe from my grandma. It's awesome. I want to start making it. Tell me what I'm like, right? And I'm like, making salsa at home and eating it is very different than canning and all the regulations around that. Have you looked into that yet? And no, they just think it tastes great. And they want to make it.
Yeah, one of the things that we all have to be realistic of, and I think a lot of the people here have raised up in their careers, and I would challenge everyone to say how much they remember the nuances of the execution of the junior levels, even the levels they were in. We all start getting a little bit complacent around how easy things are to get done and what it takes to get done. Where I'm going with that is, by the time you get to a CEO level or an exec level, small or big company, right? When you have a team and you've kind of grown to a certain degree, you tend to forget those things. It's you tend to have a rosy colored pictures of how easy and quick things can get done. And the reason I bring this up is, again, this goes back to having those conversations, because if you go back and say it's too hard, it's not possible, it's this, it's that, I mean, that never flied with me. I don't know about you, John, but that never flied with me. It was, help me understand quantitatively the impact to the company or to our business. Help me understand the risk. But again, if you just said the risk is qualitative, didn't matter to me, right? I wanted to understand the benefit to driving growth for the company. Because again, we're all in the business of selling stuff. And so that's where I really, really push that issue with people. And even when John and I debate, it's like, what's the benefit risk to the growth of the company? But John.
And I think that ties into something that's kind of going through the comments a little bit right now is, defining risk versus consequences are two different things. And understanding like something can be relatively high risk with low consequences, and that might be okay, or it can be low risk but very high consequences, right? You've got you have a low risk of a listeria outbreak, but if you have one, the consequences are as extreme as it gets, right? Those are two. And that was something that actually I was made very clear to me from a rock climber. I don't know if anybody saw the film Free Solo. This guy, climbs El Capitan without ropes, and he does a really good job of separating risk from consequences. He says, the risk of me falling is very low because I'm so dialed. This is what I do. I'm the best in the world at it. But the consequences are death. But people mix those two things up. And so separating those and understanding that the difference, I think, is really important. And it can help think about it and define a little more clearly. And an example where it may be okay or something is, you have a new product, you're going on shelf, maybe you're going out into one chain and you've got to get the product on shelf quickly. And you haven't necessarily had time to finalize your FDA label review. And so there's the risk that you have an ingredient out of order or that you miss a Prop 65 label or something like that. If you're only in a handful of stores, that risk isn't all that high. Or excuse me, the risk may be relatively high, but the consequences aren't all that high. Flip it around, if you do a national launch, the consequences of that become a lot higher. And so helping companies understand that and when it's okay to take a small risk. And obviously there's a difference between having two ingredients out of order from each other and leaving an ingredient off the list, right? The consequences of those two things are very different.
Right. That's a fantastic point. Now, this I think also illustrates kind of our theme here for today is just because you're in a particular food category, the way you manage your business and the way you look at risk is different depending upon your stage in that business. And that's a fantastic point, John. Another big area of risk then too is things are going well, which can also then create a whole new set of problems. It's like, okay, I founded this new product, things are going well. I need to start hiring some people. That's kind of the next big potential cataclysmic event within your organization, isn't it?
Oh, HR. There's so many. That's a whole nother topic. But I think I'm trying to think of where to go with this, because one of the funny things I always say is I think hiring is probably the hardest thing to do. Yeah. I think it's fraught with so many levels. You go on one date and then you get married, or whatever version you have, and we can kind of go into this. But I do think this is from a risk standpoint, and this is more apt for probably smaller companies, but testing and hiring people as contractors or hiring outside agencies. I think the one thing that I've realized over time is often you're not really sure exactly what you need until you start working with somebody, and then you're like, this is actually what I need. Unfortunately, you're not the right person, or this is what I need. We just got to redefine your role, or something like that. But when it comes down to risk, since that's the topic of the day, I do think it's interesting as I think about it, how to evaluate the risk tolerance of somebody. Mm-hmm. One thing, just to throw on adages, since John had a really good one, and I really like that one, John, is good decisions may lead to bad outcomes, and bad decisions may lead to good outcomes. Mm-hmm. And it's something that I often try and remind myself and other people of. And where I'm coming back to is whether it's hiring, packaging, FDA labeling, if you make the right decision at the time with the knowledge you have, it doesn't necessarily mean things are going to end up well, and vice versa. And I think keeping that in mind. But hiring is certainly, in the ops world, and John has a lot of experience there too, trying to find the right people who understand the risk appropriately with the culture is very challenging.
Yes. Well, and to look at their own personal risk too, right? If you're a small entrepreneurial company, you're making your first or third hire, that person has to have a certain risk tolerance for their own career, that if you hire somebody that maybe is the best, the best there is at as a plant manager, but they haven't worked in an entrepreneurial environment like that, it doesn't matter how good they are. It's not going to work. And so that's an area that I've learned through failure several times. I mean, we did that when we were running our co-packer of hired a big company guy, on paper was amazing, and just had no understanding of the difference between that and running a small entrepreneurial company.
I refer to that as, so when I would hire people in quality. There's kind of two groups of people. There's people who follow the book, and there's people who write the book. So what do I mean by that? People who follow the book are like, okay, well, I'll follow your procedures. I'll put together your reports. I'll do what you want me to do at the plant. I'll follow what you want me to do. Okay, great. In some roles, you want people who write the book. It's like, no, I can come in here and I can create the procedures. I can create the standards. I can, to your point, guys, I can do this at the appropriate time and at the appropriate context for what you need right now. There's not many people who know how to do that. And it's a rare talent. On the hiring side, so if that company is really starting to grow to that medium-sized company and you're like, oh man, this thing's taken off, probably one of the first people you're going to hire is a sales guy. Right? It's like, all right, I need to get out there and sell some product. And if that salesman is good and they have these connections and all of a sudden they're outpacing your ability to produce the product and he's out there doing that's what he's there for, man, that can create some serious risks there too, can't it?
Well, and that's a great example of making sure that incentives are aligned. Because if your first hire is that salesman and he's paid on commission, and you're running a plant and you're struggling to keep up and try to get product out the door, I mean, there's going to be tension between the two of you instantly because he's not getting paid because product's not coming out the door. And so, that can definitely, and actually across the business, misaligned incentives causes a lot of risk for the business.
Yeah, I want to highlight that because I do think, and this is life in general, but certainly in business, incentives drive behavior. It's microeconomics 101. It's human psychology 101. It's human sociology 101. Incentives drive our behavior, all of them, right? And I don't think there's an example where you can't think of that. And that doesn't mean incentives are bad or selfish. It's just incentive. I want to be a good father might lead to certain behaviors. I want to be a good person leads to certain behaviors. But ultimately, if you think about it in a business context, and it's a great evaluator. I think what I've seen, and I've actually been problem area in this in the past, what a lot of people from QA or ops go into is they go into an organization and they get really frustrated because their ideas aren't being listened to. The company doesn't understand or evaluate risk appropriately, at least according to them, et cetera, et cetera. And I think one way for you guys to validate that is to understand the incentives of the organization and how the leadership incentivizes its team, right? Yep. If it's growth at all costs, what's going to be lower on that priority list? Risk, most likely, right? Mm-hmm. If it's growth at all costs, they're going to have to shortcut sometimes. To your point, Brian, the salesperson is crushing it. They're driving sales. And again, I've been this problem child as a CEO before, and I've learned my lesson. It's like, do whatever you need to do to meet that demand. That will catch up to you ultimately. And so I do think incentive understanding is really critical. And thinking about how you incentivize your employees is so important. There was an example recently, I forget where I was listening to this or reading this, but it was about a company who was, so it was a sales group talking, and the company had a great incentive plan where they incentivized new customers at X and renewals at Y. And they started dropping the renewals down. And then they come in, they're yelling at the salespeople, our renewals have dropped 50%. Why are we not renewals? Well, it's obviously the salespeople are focused on the new hires, right? People go to where they are incentivized, especially salespeople. And so really understanding that and working with your leadership, whether it's an ops or the organization, to rejigger incentives can make a huge difference. But to be fair, much easier said than done. Much easier said than done.
Absolutely. So with that, so I wanted to also, right, we've been talking about small and medium-sized companies, but large companies have risk too. And I want to reemphasize as well, risk is not necessarily a bad thing. We think it is, but it's not. When you launch a new product, that's a risk. Do you understand what's associated? To John's point, what's the severity and the likelihood of these type of things happening in the marketplace? Mm-hmm. Do we understand that at the executive level when we're making that go, no-go decision? But even in large companies, you have risks like this that can impact how you run your processes. We've all been involved with companies who go through a merger. They're purchased or they're and all of a sudden, I think was it yesterday, Nestle announced they're laying off 10,000 people. What's being left behind with that body of work that they're doing? Large companies have these type of risks as well. And in large companies, sometimes then in those situations, you're not even in the right area of expertise. So if there's a big acquisition in that company and they buy a hot dog company and you're a beverage company, man, you got a lot of learning to do.
For sure. I mean, risk isn't static, right? And so it changes day by day, changes month to month. The risk of before 2020 was very different than the risk after 2020 with COVID. I mean, there's so many different types of things that, tariffs there's risk constantly evolving. And this is one of the frustrations of big companies is, right, they just kind of go slow and stay kind of true to the course without really evaluating the changes of the macroeconomic environment. And I think that's why they buy small companies, right? Because they're innovating and they're doing these things. But yeah, understanding that risk is a constantly evolving mechanism is really, really important. Big, small, medium, doesn't matter.
Yeah, agree. And I think that's one of the lessons that we're slowly learning in food. And I think from the food safety, food quality side, we're really bad at this, is understanding that risk is not static. We want to create a food safety plan and go through the pretty documents and assign high, medium, and low. We say, okay, all done. We'll look at this next year. To your point, this changes every single day. If marketing comes and says, hey, we're launching a new product in 2 weeks with this new product with sesame sprinkles on it. Whoa, right? And they've introduced a new allergen in the process. Your risk profile just changed immeasurably overnight.
And by the way, the marketing person doesn't know that. Like, I didn't know that when I was at General Mills or White Wave. I didn't think about that kind of stuff. It was like, this is what the consumer wants. Let's just go launch it.
Right.
This is why spending that time having those relationships and understanding, because what would happen is I'd come in and say, I want to introduce peanuts into the facility, hypothetically, and QA or ops is going to get pissed, and it becomes well, this is what the consumer wants. Well, this is the problem. It's not collaborative. It becomes contentious versus really, again, this is all about human nature, empathy, understanding, spending time with the other person. It's hugely valuable.
Right. And that's one of the lessons I learned once I became a consultant, is working in large companies for 20 years, running quality and things like this. There's certain groups that drove me nuts. And like marketing, for example, right? They would want to make these claims, and then I would have a big fight with marketing and bring in the legal guys and all these things. And I really didn't understand it. But now that I've been out on my own, it's like, oh, okay, now I get it, right? That's super, super important. And how you market the products. And to your point with the incentives earlier as well, Dustin, is what are the marketing incentives? What does your company want to do? What are their targets? Who are they going after? What type of shelf space? What type of velocity? What type of claims do they want to make versus the competitor? And I hear this a lot of times with marketing in large food companies is like, well, we want to make these claims on the packaging. And I'm like, I don't like that. Well, everybody else is making that claim. I'm like, and I would start channeling my inner mom, right? Well, if everybody's jumping off a bridge, and they would just look at me like, they just saw me as a giant obstacle, and because I didn't understand their perspective.
Well, I think the best thing a QA person can be is understand how to live in the gray.
Yeah.
So I think when I'm looking at QA hires or people, I want to find a QA person that lives more in the gray than the black and the white, which I think, to be fair and not quality assurance and a lot of ops are very black and white about their worlds. And in a lot of cases, that's fair because they need to be. But I think helping like a lawyer does, or I think like I communicate a lot, which is, here's the pro, here's the con, here's the risk, here's the opportunity. Let me give you the information of how to make the decision. Mm-hmm. You're going to get a lot further when they trust that you're giving them both sides of the coin than if you're coming constantly just saying, no, it's not possible. This is the rules, you can't break it. I would say there's very few times, at least in my experience, where there's a hard and fast black and white rule. A lot of times even if there is a hard and fast rule, what are the ways around it legally, safely? But if you come with that mentality, and this is probably the best piece of advice I could give as a business leader to a QA or ops person, if you come with a gray mentality versus black and white mentality, you will develop such a better relationship with the marketing, sales, and leadership than if you're constantly the person, as you said, which is, no, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. No, you can't do that.
Or even just a simple reframe of, instead of, no, you can't do that, your first conversation is, here's what it takes so that you can do that.
Right.
Here's the path to yes.
And sometimes that might mean, hey, you need to spend $10 million. Okay, well, at least you gave me the path to yes. I might say, you're out of your mind, but at least you did give me the path to yes.
right? I think a lot of times where quality people crash and burn is they don't understand the difference between food safety and food quality. Food safety is that yes, no, pass, fail, good, bad. We need to be very clear, and the organization needs to understand that, and we need to champion that in the QA food safety groups. Food quality is a business decision, and you need to understand the metrics with that. So it's like John nailed it perfectly, right? What's our risk associated with this versus the opportunity? How are we willing to work through that? And if you're a smaller company and you're moving fast on the fly, you need to be able to flex with that. And my job then, from a quality standpoint, is to provide that information to the CEO or the leadership team and say, okay, here are the metrics, here are the different complaints that we're seeing, here's how this is going to play out. My recommendation is, relative to risk, is it's 50-50, right? Then the business can make a decision. It's not your job to say, no, we got complaints and you need to, no, you're part of the business. And a lot of times QA food safety people forget that. You are part of the business and your job is to sell product.
Yes. Otherwise, you are out of a job and you have to go work somewhere else.
Right. You can sit at home and be righteous. So 5 minutes left on the show, guys. Oh, God, this is a fantastic conversation. I love this. So we'll kind of bring this back up to the 30,000 foot level. What would you like to leave our audience with today?
I'll let John go first on this one. Put him on the spot.
I mean, I would say that particularly how it relates to FSQA, the organizations I've been a part of that had that as part of the company culture and built in is really the ones that had the lowest risk profile. And that comes back to everything we were talking about of like incentives were aligned. Like we got 100% on our SQFA audit. Everybody gets a bonus for that in the company, not just the quality folks, right? Everybody's aligned that that's an important thing to do. That's easier said than done. It's something that I coach small companies to build in from day one, is to align that, and a lot harder to come into a bigger company and try to build that into the system. But I think the way to go about it, especially if you're sitting in a quality seat, is to approach leadership with the quantitative reasons that it's beneficial to build that in, and to include other parts of the company in the weekly safety meeting. And and frankly, all the same things can be said for human safety. Like I think about those two things similarly, but finding a way to try to ingrain that in and make sure that your head of sales or your head of marketing is equally as invested in the outcome of your upcoming audit as you are, I think is the best path to success.
Yeah, you measure what you manage. And so you have to be really careful what you set up as those incentives. So you could have the best intentions of saying that, all right, we need to have an audit score of 95 or higher, but then you find out behind the scenes that people are hiding things to get to that score. You just shot yourself in the foot. So you have to be really, really careful with what you manage and measure.
Just real quick, Brian, I think the two things I would leave with is most organizations in CPG, the CEO comes from a sales-minded background in most cases. Yeah. So understand that just because they don't understand it doesn't mean they're a bad person or they're stupid or whatever. You need to help them understand that in a way that is tied towards the goals of the company. I think that's number one. And I think the other one is understanding where you can win and where you can afford to lose, which is what John kind of was hitting on. And so those are the two things, but the relationships, the integration, the understanding of each other, so powerful. And one, I wish if I went back to, my early days at General Mills, I wish I spent a ton more time with all the different cross-functional, not just to network, not just to build relationships, but to actually understand what they did day to day, like how they did their jobs, what their incentives were, how they thought about their worlds. If I were going to go back, that'd be the number one thing I would do over again.
That's really good advice. And from my perspective, everybody's talking about food safety culture. What we're talking about here today, this is how you build it into a company. Food safety is not the responsibility of QA and the food safety groups. It's the company's responsibility, and everybody in that supply chain, that design and control process of selling, launching, building, and getting those things out in the market, all have a piece of food safety, and you need to optimize that risk associated with that. And I'm really happy because what we're talking about here, people are really starting to get an understanding of and broadening their perspective relative to this and looking at their company And you guys are at the cutting edge of it. I really salute what you're doing. So good work.
Thank you. I learn a lot from John. I think he learns a lot from my sales-minded things. He even proposed something the other day. I was like, oh my God, John, you might be a salesperson now. So it's great. It's a great relationship.
So I'll put in a link. I promised the link for my sponsor, Culture Advisory Group. Check them out. They do amazing work out there. And as we were talking about risk assessment optimization and the different conversations taken about that, reach out to me. Let's have some more conversations. If people want to find you guys, how do they find you in MacGray Consulting?
Well, it's interesting because we don't have a website, and so that's on our to-do list. But you can Dustin Finkel, Finkel at MacGray, MacGrayConsulting.com, or John's is easier because it's just John at MacGrayConsulting.com. We have it on to-do list to shorten our email at some point too. But always, or through you, or LinkedIn, or however they want.
There we go. I'll put John's in there. It's a little easier. There we go. So I'll put your email.
MacGrayConsulting.com, not just MacGray.com. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. So MacGray Consulting. Oops.
You know, it's
I will correct that in the comments because that's
speaking of decisions you make early on that you're not thinking about the long-term ramifications.
Yeah, it's like my email. Look how long my email is. Isn't it crazy?
Things that you thought made sense at the beginning.
John at MacGrayConsulting.com.
There you go.
You got it.
All right. Design control. There we are. Thank you, gentlemen. And thank you, everybody, for attending this eye-opening and very enlightening chat. I learned a ton. I got to go back through this. There's just a ton of bullet points you guys provided in this and good observations and wisdom. So thank you again. And thank you, everybody, for joining us this week. I hope you got as much value out of it as I did. And of course, we'll be back here next week on Friday at the same time, 8 a.m. Mountain Time, 10 a.m. Eastern, while I'll bring other amazing guests like John and Dustin on to the chat to have a conversation with you. In the meantime, enjoy the weekend. Go out. Beautiful fall weather here in Colorado. Hopefully it's nice where you are. And we'll see you back here next Friday. John, Dustin, thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, everybody, for attending.
Thank you.